There's nothing more frustrating than coming home with a memory card filled with potential, but then feeling stuck in front of the computer because you don't know how to bring life into those raw files. But editing doesn't actually have to be complicated or overwhelming. With the right workflow, it can be fast, fun, and incredibly rewarding. So today, I'll walk you through a quick and easy Lightroom workflow packed with powerful masking techniques and smart adjustments that allow you to take even dull and noisy raw files and turn them into stunning final images. Let's get into it. When looking for images to edit for this video, I came across a folder of photos that I've taken many years ago in the deep dark rainforest on the Gold Coast. And one image that I thought would be a perfect example to work on was of this female log runner. These birds live on the ground, foraging through the leaf litter in the deepest, darkest areas of the rainforest. And looking at this raw file now, it doesn't look great at first glance, but I'm confident that we can turn it into a beautiful final image. Before we jump into editing, I quickly wanted to mention that if you want to learn more about image editing and develop your own fast and easy to follow workflow, that I would highly recommend that you check out my Lightroom and Next Generation Photoshop masterclasses. In these classes, I teach you step by step and in easy to follow chapters all the important techniques and tools you need to master in order to be able to get fantastic results from your own raw files. And I will show you exactly how and when to use these tools. And once you acquire that knowledge, we will put it right into action and edit some of my raw files together. My masterclasses have helped many students to turn their editing lives around and get fantastic results with ease and have fun along the way. But don't just take my word for it. Check out some of the amazing reviews that I receive from happy students on a daily basis. So if you want to turn editing from a frustrating chore where you don't know exactly what to do or what sliders to pull into a rewarding experience where you get great results with ease and have an easy to follow workflow, make sure to check out my Lightroom and Next Generation Photoshop masterclasses down there in the description. So now that we've decided which image to edit in Lightroom, it's time to head over to the Develop section where we do all our work. And the first step I always like to do to all my images taken above ISO 400 is to run noise reduction. And to do that, I either use Adobe Enhance that comes with Camera Raw and Lightroom or DxO Pure Raw. So if I have a raw file like this, I simply need to right click on the file, go to Enhance, and normally I like to use a strength of 50%, and then all you need to do is click OK, and Adobe will create a new noise-free DNG file for you. And if we now zoom in and compare the raw file to the DNG file, we can see how Adobe was able to nicely remove most of the grain and still maintain a lot of the detail in the bird. Now, this is a very simple way to remove noise from your images because there's basically no settings, and Adobe Enhance comes with Camera Raw and Lightroom. So for most people, this is a great solution. If you want to have more control and sometimes get slightly better results in difficult situations, you could also use DxO Pure Raw, which is also quite simple to use and lets you control the results a little bit more. DxO Pure Raw also integrates with Lightroom, and to be able to use it, we simply go right-click, Export, Preview and Process with DxO Pure Raw 5, which has just been released a few days ago. In here, I like to use either Deep Prime 3 or Deep Prime XD. And then at the bottom, I also like to push the Force Detail slider up a fair bit because it keeps more detail in the bird. And for the rest, I usually like to keep the lens sharpening on, but turn off the rest. And then all we need to do is process now, and we also get a nice and clean DNG file. And if you want to try out DxO Pure Raw, I linked it for you down there in the description, and I also negotiated a special 20% Easter discount for all of you. Now that we have our nice and noise-free DNG file, it's time to make it shine. So looking at this image, it's clear that the bird is too dark, and I want to work on the background so that it doesn't look so bright and distracting anymore. And then there's also this leaf covering the bird's tail, which I probably want to remove. And of course, the image could use a little crop. And the first step I always like to take is to adjust the color profile. These color profiles can actually have a profound impact on your images, so choosing the right profile is important. Adobe gives us a few pre-made profiles that can sometimes work quite well and other times don't work so well, and that's why I like to use my process. But if you don't have them, you can either buy them or use the Adobe profiles. In this case, I like to go to my profiles over here on the right hand side, and then I think my vibrant more contrast will do a very good job. From here, I go over to our basic panel where I want to use the exposure slider, the highlights and the shadows. And of course, we also need to adjust our white balance. But especially when an image is quite dark, I often like to brighten it first because then it's easier to see the impact that the other sliders have. So in this case, the image is quite dark. So I want to brighten it a fair bit without the background going totally out of control. And what I often like to do is to brighten the exposure slider and then bring detail back with the highlight slider. So in that case, I pull the highlight slider back a fair bit. And then because a lot of areas on the bird are still quite dark, I will also lift the shadows a little bit. But you can see we can't go too hard with the shadow slider because then the whole image looks strange. And it's better to only do basic subtle tweaks and then use masking later on to make adjustments to certain areas that are still too bright or too dark. So the main aim in the basic panel is here to just brighten the image a bit and also kind of just stretch the dynamic range so we have the maximum detail available. Bring the shadows back a little bit. And that looks quite good already, but now the white balance looks off. The image is a bit yellow and a bit green. So we can either now manually change the warmth and the magenta point, or we can use the little sample tool here and try to click sort of on a neutral gray area like on the bird's head here. And if you click on a good neutral gray area, you will quickly get a pretty decent result that we can then manually fine tune. And next what I want to do is add a little bit of vibrance and saturation to the image to bring out some more of the colors. So I add a little bit of vibrance and then I add a little bit of saturation, not too much because these greens tend to go a bit crazy. And what sometimes happens if you add saturation and vibrance to your image, the image goes too warm or too green again, like in this case. So I will add a little bit more magenta to the file to keep it nice and neutral. Next, what I want to do is crop the image because that gives us a better idea of what else needs to be done to the file. So in this case, I want to show a bit of the environment, but cropping the image a bit will also help me to remove some of the unwanted background items. And I think that looks pretty good. We have a lot more emphasis on the bird now, and it's nice in the diagonal of my frame as well, directing the eye of the viewer straight onto the bird's face. If you're only doing global adjustments, there's not much more you could actually do to this image and you end up with an okay file. But the true power of editing comes when you do selective edits, and this is what I want to show you now. So first, what I don't like in this image is how the bird's tail is covered with this leaf. And luckily, we have a lot of good helpers available now that should be able to remove the leaf without leaving a trace. So to remove an item, I'll go over to the remove section, use the remove tool, use generative AI and use a pretty small size. And then I'm just going to circle around the area that I want to remove. And now Lightroom will recreate the end of the tail and the moss, hopefully at least. And now over here on the right hand side, we also have 3 variations. So this is option 1. This is option 2, and this is option 3. And I think option 1 probably looks the best. How far you want to go with something like this in your images is totally up to you, but I thought it's a good example how we can quickly remove something in Lightroom. And now we're going to head over to the masking panel so we can treat parts of the bird and the background individually and make the image shine. So the masking panel is over here on the right hand side, and the first thing I want to address is this unpleasant upper left hand side behind the bird. And the best way to do that, in my opinion, is to use a radial gradient and then subtract the subject from that selection so that we're only affecting the background and not the subject. So to do that, we click over here on radial gradient, and then we can just drag that size with our mouse, and we can also adjust that later on. But as you can see now, at the moment, the subject would be affected by it as well. So we go over here on the right hand side where it says subtract, and then we go to select subject. So now Lightroom has nicely removed our subject from the selection. If we make changes now, only the area that you can see that is red will be affected. So what I want to do here is use my special trick. I will pull out dehaze, which makes it brighter and softer. So now that we have our selection here, I scroll down all the way to the dehaze panel and I pull out dehaze, which just makes the background more nice and smooth and takes away some of the harshness. Now I feel like the color of the background is a little bit too bright and too cool. So I go to the color section and then I'm just going to add a little bit of warmth to that corner, shift the tint a little bit towards green, and the hue I also shift. And if we click that on and off now, you can see how we nicely took away some of the distracting elements from the background and make it nice and smooth, kind of like the sun coming through the rainforest from behind the bird. Next, I want to work on the foreground because I think it's a little bit too bright and distracting from the bird, and we're going to do that with a linear gradient. So I go back to create a new mask, go to linear gradient, and then I just pull that up from the bottom of the frame. And again, we go subtract, select subject, just to make sure that we're not darkening the already dark area of our subject. And now we can either use the exposure slider or the curve, for instance, to darken the foreground. In this case, I think I'll go down to the curve, and then I just pull down the upper third of the curve, darkening the foreground a little bit. Now there's still one quite distracting area in our image on the right hand side, this dark spot here, and we can remove that with another radial gradient and pulling out dehaze. So I create a new mask, radial gradient, and I just sort of drag that to the size of this dark area. And by pulling in the middle, in or out, you make it either more or less feathered. And we want a quite large feather here. And you can also angle it around. So now that I've selected that dark area, I go to dehaze and I pull out some of that dehaze area. Actually need to make this a little bit bigger. And now if we click that mask on and off, we can see how we nicely removed that dark corner simply by using another mask. Now that I'm fairly happy with the background, it's time to work on the bird because I want to brighten certain areas of it, but not the whole bird. And here I want to use another great masking trick, and that is to intersect two masks. What we want to do is select the subject and then intersect that with the brush. And what that does is that we then can brush within our subject without brushing onto the background, but only the areas we brush on will actually be affected. So for instance, I can easily brighten the belly of the bird without brushing onto the background or affecting the whole bird. So to do that, we create a new mask, select subject, and then we click on the mask and hold down the Option or Alt key, and that brings up something called intersect. So we click on that, and then we select brush. So now nothing has happened so far. But once we make the changes and then start brushing, only the areas that we brush on will be affected by what we're doing. So I'm thinking in this case, we need to definitely brighten parts of the bird, give it a bit of shadows as well, probably pull up the curve a little bit as well. And then I actually want to add a bit of dehaze to it to give it a good overall feel. Now you can see it's too bright on the bird's face, for instance. So what I do now is I actually start brushing on the areas that I want to brighten. And you'll see the image jump back to what it was previously. And the changes that I've just made on the whole image will now only show in the areas that I'm brushing on. So you can see it's dark again now. And with my brush, I just need a little bit more flow, a little bit less feather. And then I'm just brushing on the areas that I want to brighten, like the flank of the bird, the tail, and definitely also in the throat and a little bit around the bird's face. And now if we click that on and off, we can already see that we very nicely were able to just brighten certain areas on the bird, similar to what layer masking in Photoshop would also be doing by using a select subject mask and intersecting it with the brush. And now to finish the image off, I just want to make another mask, select subject to make changes on the whole bird. So I create another mask, select subject, and then I think we can brighten the bird a little bit more. We can pull down the highlights slightly, shift up the shadows a bit. And then I also want to do an S-curve on the bird where I pull up the upper third of the curve and then pull down the lower third of the curve to give it a little bit more contrast. And now if we click all our masks on and off, we can see that we've already been able to really nicely put nice light onto the bird and take some of the distracting elements of the foreground and the background away. There's just a few more tweaks I'll make now, and one of them is that there's a bit of green reflecting from the moss onto the bird's belly, which I find quite distracting, that I would like to clean up. So create a new mask, select subject, click on that, hold down the Option Alt key, intersect that with the brush. And now I'm just going to pull down the saturation, lift the shadows a little bit so it blends in more. And I'm actually going to warm it up slightly so that the color of the belly still remains good. And I'm also going to add a little bit of magenta. So now the bird looks a bit strange, but remember, once I start brushing, only the areas that I brush on will be affected by these changes. So now I'm going to need a bit more flow, nice and smooth brush. And now I'm just going to brush over these areas on the bird's belly and the back that are a bit too green. Same up here in the bird's face and on the bird's flank. Now if we click that on and off, we can see how we nicely removed some of the strange color casts on the bird. And now we're basically done with the image already. And I think if we turn that on and off, the differences are quite dramatic and we have a much more pleasant looking image. What I like to do at the end of my editing workflow is to always go back to the basic panel and make a few more tweaks here to make sure that the overall image looks great. And then there's one more thing on the bird where I feel like the throat and parts of the back are a little bit too yellow orangey and should be a bit more red. So what we can do for that is go to the color mixer and then I just go to the hue, go to the oranges and just pull that a little bit towards orange. And just like that, we've taken a dull, dark and noisy raw file and turned it into a quite nice and presentable image. Would you agree? I know image editing can be quite subjective and there's no real right or wrong. What matters the most in the end is that you like the images that you're creating and that you have an easy to follow workflow that guides you through the whole editing process. Because without that workflow and easy to follow steps, you will often get lost in your images and will never get the results that you truly want. And if you need help with that, make sure to check out my masterclasses. And now I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments. Do you enjoy image editing or is it more a necessary evil? And would you want me to make more image editing videos? Let me know in the comments. Also share with me what are your biggest struggles when it comes to image editing. I'd love to hear from you. Also give me a thumbs up for the video, check out my channel membership and of course hit that subscribe button and I'll see you in another video very soon. Bye.